Hi, so welcome to the Pollock for this post-screening discussion of Swoon, 1992, and I'm delighted to welcome Tom Kalin, the director. So I watched this film first when it came out in LA in 1992, and over the years I've seen it many times, but this is the second time I've seen it in 35mm print on big screen. And I think I've been teaching this class on cultural theory for I don't know, maybe 17, 18 times by now. And out of that, probably have shown this film consistently about 15 times. So this is like one of my go-to films that does a lot of work for the kind of argument or what I want to get across to my students. Tom, why Swoon? And how Swoon? Meaning, these are the how-why questions, like how did you get to make this film? And why the title Swoon? It could be many things, right?
Sure. Well, I guess in spirit of full disclosure, I'll start with why it's titled Swoon. There is an English new wave band called Prefab Sprout, and their album was called Swoon. So it's, Patty McAloon, I have to thank for the title of the movie. I think the spirit of Prefab Sprout's music was, to me, it captured what the film is about and the feeling of it. It also, at the time when I made the film, I talked about it. It's a word that sounds like a bird, like a loon. Mm-hmm. It's also a state that you're in when you're, St. Teresa, of Bernini's sculpture of St. Teresa in ecstasy. Mm-hmm. She's swooning with religious rapture. There's something erotic. There's something religious about it. Those things are simultaneous in it. It's also a command. So I'm telling you to swoon. It's also, and it's describing something. It's a noun. And I guess we could also even use it as an adjective. So the flexibility of the word, and I think in that period of time that my colleague Todd Haynes had made a first film called Poison. Yeah. There was definitely a trend in that period of making one-word movies. I, for whatever reason, still can't get past the letter S. So my movies, the feature films I've directed only begin with S. So I may step out sometime and use another consonant.
Yeah. Now I have to ask, why Savage Grace?
Savage Grace is the name of the book. My second feature was a movie called Savage Grace, which is based on a nonfiction book that used that name, and why change what was good in the book? So yeah.
So it's a strange, choice for a first feature. I don't know, maybe not. You tell me.
Well, I am the youngest of 11 children. I'm delighted, just to embarrass him slightly, to say that my nephew is here, the son of one of my brothers. And my father was born in 1917 and my mother was born in 1920. So my parents were alive when the Leopold and Loeb murders happened. My grandmother was born in the 19th century, as was my grandfather, and they were, I grew up in Chicago, the youngest of 11 children. My father worked in the juvenile justice and criminal justice system. So my father was the head of a thing called the St. Charles School for Boys in the 1950s, which is a reformatory school. And then he worked for a thing called the National Council on Crime and Delinquency in the 60s when I was born. And later in his career, he worked for the parole department at Stateville Penitentiary, which is actually the prison where Leopold and Loeb were kept. So in some way, I'm hanging out the family shingle and making this movie in a family that's done the social work and crime work. My grandmother was completely obsessed with crime, so there was like a scrapbook or material of lurid crimes from Chicago. And Leopold and Loeb were a kind of cautionary tale. So if you acted out as a child, they would say, you better be careful, Leopold and Loeb will pick you up. Wow. It may be unknown to this crowd, but the famous and irreverent comedian Lenny Bruce used to make jokes about Bobby Franks. I was also aware of that edge.
Okay. So it's based on this famous murder story, 1920s, but Swoon is not a whodunit narrative at all. It's not whodunit. We know exactly who did it, and more or less how they did it. There's no mystery there. Now, why did it is not, it is also spelled out, but in their own words, right? So there's some room there for speculation, why they did it. The mystery that remains, that takes center stage, that has to do with the relationship of the two protagonists. Nathan and Dick, this shift in focus from the murder mystery angle to the intriguing dynamic between these two friends, who are also clearly a couple. From the first time I watched Swoon, I understood this narrational choice as a queer one. And queer not just in the obvious sense that it's about a pair of homosexuals, but it also because it pushes against normative ideas of homosexuality also. right? So uh, the plot's focus confounds our expectations about the arc of the story, the genre, the motive for murder, all of those things. So tell us a bit about your thought process, how you came to these decisions, this shift away from the whodunit angle to the more relationship oriented.
Yeah, I love that question. It's wonderful. Well, I mean, I think that the backstory is just how I started was becoming aware of the crime itself and doing a little bit of reading. And of course, there's a cinematic history of this case. It's been fictionalized or put on screen twice, at least twice, in Alfred Hitchcock's movie Rope, which I was never an obsessed fan of, and also the movie directed by Richard Fleischer called Compulsion, which is based on a novel that is a very close simulation of the case. Instead of being called Richard and Nathan, they have other character names, but all the dynamics are similar. Those stories make the law-like figure who enters the narrative central. So when Jimmy Stewart enters the narrative, he becomes a kind of normative lens through which we see these characters, and we're never inside the obsessive relationship. We never get to feel what Nathan felt, get to feel what Richard felt. Once I looked at the movies, and there was a book by Hal Higdon called Crime of the Century, which was out in the world. For those of you who are filmmakers, I was making a movie based in fact. I couldn't afford to option the book, which is one way. Like when we made Savage Grace, we optioned a book, paid money in order to adapt it. So my starting point was to get the court transcript from the Chicago Historical Society and to read everything that had been said in the investigation leading up to the trial itself. Mm-hmm. I naively thought this would be a simple process and I would have a script quickly, but court transcripts are thousands of pages long, and it was microfilm at that stage, so I had to get the microfilm printed and reading it. The revelation is exactly the thing you're pointing to, which was when two people commit a murder and there are no witnesses, who actually wielded the chisel and who did not became a really central question about what exactly was going on between the two characters. How did the circulation of power work? What was going on? And the thing you hear Richard Loeb say in the interrogation, I was in the back seat. That's obviously a mistake. I was up in the front seat, is verbatim. That lie that he gives is verbatim in the court transcript. And I still remember reading hundreds of pages and getting to that moment and being like, there it is. He for sure is the person who did this thing. So yeah, I think that became the kind of then understanding that all of these questions of that their secret relationship was now in the blinding light of day. And they had different, but it wasn't open. There wasn't even the word homosexual to describe it. And on an unconscious level, of course, Nathan was getting what he wanted. When Richard says to him, if you could get pregnant, you would, wouldn't you? This idea of, how in a heterosexual relationship, a woman might entrap a man, that Richard understanding suddenly that Nathan unconsciously wants the relationship to be seen because it makes him visible, it makes them visible. Right. And that Richard didn't want that at all. Yeah. And that there's this tension between what the characters know and think and what the audience knows and thinks. And I make you be involved in that by tracking the two characters instead of tracking the investigator, instead of tracking the cop. And by making you track that, you're sharing a guilt. In storytelling, there's the idea of dramatic irony, that the audience shares a secret with the character. And by making you share a secret with the character, I have you halfway there. You're with them. And I guess the last thing is wanting to make, I remember very vividly seeing the movie by Kieslowski, which is part of the Decalogue, called A Short Film About Killing, which is a brutal film about a sort of senseless killing, first of a taxi driver who murders a stranger, and then the state killing this criminal, like two different killings. And the unflinching way the murder was shown in that movie, and the way that it put you really close to something that was really uncomfortable gave me some of the boldness I needed to tell this story.
I'm going to get back to this again, but I want to first ask about your educational background. And by that, I mean not just the formal education, but perhaps experiences that were formative to you. I mean, when you made this film, how old were you?
We shot Swoon in 14 shooting days, by the way. So we shot for 10 shooting days in 1990. We waited for 8 months because you might have noticed in the prison scene that Richard Loeb does not get his head shaved while Nathan does. Wonder why? Because the actor was like, I'm not shaving my head on the shooting day. It had been in the script the entire time. So we then had to wait 8 months for his hair to grow back. and shoot. So some like the murder is shot in 2 sequences. In the first 10 days, you see Bobby get into the car. And in the first production, I didn't shoot the murder well. So 8 months later, we shoot the second half of the scene where you see the kid dragged over and actually murdered. And there are a bunch of things, like all the courtroom scenes are shot late in the film. So in those last 4 shooting days. So there were production and practical reasons why the film got split in that way.
So you're late 20s.
Yes, and so it's 27 to 30. Basically, the movie comes out, I'm 30 in 1992 when it premieres at Sundance.
I know this because we're the same age.
Yes.
So educational background.
I come from the Chicago suburban area. I grew up in a town called Homewood. I went to a well-known, excellent high school called Homewood Flossmoor. I was an actor in high school quite ambitiously. I won awards for my acting, but I appeared very young when I was 18, and it was clear that my future would be playing like 16-year-olds until I was 22. So I stopped acting. I went to University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. I started in English literature. That didn't last very long, and I quickly got enrolled in the School of Arts, and I got a painting degree. I wasn't a skilled painter going in. Became a painter through the kind of lens of postmodernism, through content rather than form more. I started making photographic work there. I began to make large mural photography, sometimes room size. I would make photographs and wheat paste onto an entire wall in a room. Then I went to Chicago, School of the Art Institute of Chicago. My degree is in photography and video. And then in 1987, I came to New York City to attend the Whitney Museum's Independent Study Program. If you don't know about it, the Whitney, it's still a program that exists, very inexpensive. They have a curatorial studies program and a studio program. And at that time, it was literally $750 a semester.
This is postgraduate.
Postgraduate. And so that's how I moved to New York in 87. And during that, when I moved to New York City, I become involved in ACT UP and Grand Fury, which are 2 AIDS activist movements that are happening. For a younger audience in this room, it might not be clear, but shooting a movie in 1990, 91, and releasing it in 92, it's the height of the AIDS crisis. And as a young gay man dealing with those issues, those energies are part of this movie. I don't think of Swoon at all as allegorical or metaphorical at all about AIDS, but the ferocity of it, the emotional feeling of it, gives you some window of what that time felt like.
I'm going to jump to something that's very quickly side thing. I wasn't planning to ask, but it just came to mind. Like that moment when you were involved, right? You draped a giant condom
over Jesse Helms. I actually wasn't at the Jesse Helms condom protest, but many of my dear friends were. Jesse Helms was a senator, much like it's Mitch McConnell, but worse in his generation. And he had a house, and they made a giant house-sized condom, and they went and pulled the house-sized condom over his house because he was against condom use and was an incredibly homophobic politician.
And so the quip was something like they wanted to stop the toxic infection from coming out of politics, toxic politics, right?
Yes.
We need a giant one now.
We need to revive house-sized condoms in this administration, I think.
Anyway, so, this question about the educational background was really important because, I asked that of all filmmakers, but for you, it strikes me as remarkably that this film is so erudite, it's so sophisticated and analytical, it's deliberately discursive in a way that, I could say it's woke, but it's not entertaining in the commercial popular sense of the word, right? Yet it is utterly compelling, and it got broad distribution also when it first came out, right? There's a sense of urgency, in spite of the tone of the cool detachment and your refusal to turn it into some kind of vague invocation of humanity or their humanity. One thing one of the guys lawyer says that once they're in the prison, then they'll have emotions. Now they're being too cool, which is probably true of all of us, right? But they never really repent. You don't see that happening. So that's really interesting. And Nathan's howls in the prison at the end, that's where you come closest to this sort of, but even that's more animal-like, not quite human. So you retain that aspect. So the primal, raw stuff, that howling, I wonder how we might expect or rather understand this kind of directorial choices in relation to the film's context. You already mentioned AIDS, and if you want to talk a little bit about that, it's definitely about that stuff, but...
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think one thing that would not be, most of you might not even be aware of the thing I'm going to describe now, and certainly wouldn't have easy access to the meaning of it. The reason I put the bed, we talked about this the other day, the reason I put the bed in the courtroom is at that time it made me think of a Supreme Court decision that just had happened called Bowers versus Hardwick. Just quickly, Michael Hardwick was a guy living in Georgia. He littered incorrectly and got a summons for littering. I'm not kidding. And he failed to attend the court date for his littering. The police officers went to his house and entered. He had a house guest sleeping on his couch. The house guest entered and was like, oh yeah, Michael's in the bedroom. The cops went in, opened the bedroom door, and found Michael having consensual sex, oral sex with another man. They were arrested because in Georgia, at that time, sodomy was illegal. In case you're heterosexual and you are horrible people and have oral sex, just to let you know that heterosexual oral sex was considered sodomy in Georgia. And so this court case goes all the way up to the highest court in Georgia. It gets reversed, and the state's attorney or the attorney general of Georgia, who's Bowers, brings it all the way to the attorney court, the Supreme Court to, say that the Georgia sodomy law should stand. And so this is 1987. Not so shockingly, at that period of time, the Supreme Court says, no, there is no fundamental right to sodomy, and Georgia can criminalize sodomy. So Michael Hardwick was, in fact, the sodomy was considered to be a federal offense. There was a big protest in Washington in 1987, which I attended October, I believe, of 1987. So when I'm thinking of, the state's surveillance and control and knowledge of what people are doing in the period of the Leopold and Loeb crime, I'm also trying to make a movie that's making you think of what had happened in contemporary events. Surely the sharp-eyed viewer notices a remote on the bed or a push-button telephone at a train station. You notice the physical external props that I'm using are anachronistic. And those obviously are me being indebted to the amazing Derek Jarman, who directed many films and who I'm, really honestly copying. What you might not think about or notice in the movie is that I've cast a black female stenographer in 1924 in Chicago when there would never have been a black female stenographer. And when the judge says, as he did in the real case, women have to leave the courtroom, women really did have to leave the courtroom, and reporters, and when I make a black female stenographer then leave the room, I'm actually asking you as a viewer, an audience, who writes history? Who's included in history? Who's not? So using these kind of anachronistic elements in a way maybe that shed light on the period and help the audience understand that the things I'm talking about in the film are contemporary. The last thing to say is just movies like Bonnie and Clyde, which I watched probably too young to be healthy, had huge impact on me because they helped me understand that you could make a movie about the 1930s, set in the 1930s, but really be commenting on what was happening in America during the 1960s. So the idea that period films could inform the time that you're living in really acutely.
Yeah. This is going to be a later question, but since you brought it up, I'll bring it up now. So the film, this one and Savage Grace, your two features, go back to an earlier period. In this case, it's 1920s, Savage Grace is 1970s and before. So that allows your films to look amazing because those 2 decades were amazing in terms of fashion and, totally. The roaring 20s and this, So those moments allow you to talk about the current moment when you're making the film.
Totally.
Right? Going back into that, like there's a kind of distance that you said. But I was also really struck by how much effort is there here to bring that lovingly to life. And particularly your use of the Coolidge's entry or the train, right? And he addresses the train and the thronging people. I mean, those historical footage from the archive you use. And yet you seem to have a real problem with historicism, right? Like the historicism being the idea that there's an ism of history that if you use certain tropes and like real evidentiary stuff from the era, then you've captured it fully and correctly, authentically. But you put in these anachronistic things to screw that up, to muddle up that kind of easy. But I also thought of, like the kind of genealogical understanding of history that Michel Foucault talks about following Nietzsche, right? That history is not just one master narrative that's linear with clear causal relationships between the various events, that is sort of universal. but it's much more messy and like fragmented, and sometimes we go forward, sometimes we go backwards.
Yes.
So there's no clear telos or objective.
Yes. That's such a dense and amazing question. I have a lot of thoughts about it. I think one of the great pleasures I made a first feature that was celebrated and successful, and that was incredible. It was just, I mean, how could you have that experience and complain about it? If you did, there would be something wrong with you as a person. So it's amazing to have that experience. And only after that success did I start to get some negative reactions. I was talking the other day about in Premiere magazine, this writer, Paul Rudnick, who writes under the pseudonym of Libby Gelman Waxner, pretending to be a Long Island cranky woman writing film reviews, wrote in a review kind of poking fun at Swoon and called it a 90-minute Obsession ad. Obsession was, of course, the Calvin Klein campaign shot by Bruce Weber. It's fair enough. I'm absolutely aping 90s fashion in this movie. But of course, Bruce Weber is copying the photography of Herbert List, a German photographer from decades before. So this notion of, postmodern parody, or the notion of pastiche, or bringing something forward, or using something that comes from pop culture to hook a contemporary audience's eye, while at the same time anchoring it in something dissonant or anchored in period. Like I'm using real period language pretty consistently throughout the film, and language that I didn't always write, that I shaped, but I'm putting it in a mise en scène that feels contemporary and that uses things that fashion photographers do all the time, which is bend time and bend space. Yeah. So in both Swoon and Savage Grace use fashion significantly as part of the narrative. I love to, I had been a painter in undergrad and my master's degree was in photography. I loved the idea of working in a second-class citizen format, that painting was important and photography was less so, and so there was more opportunity in the form that was less important. I like the idea of using things that are, so that's why I like making a genre film, because genre films are looked down on and are not considered to be important. But genre films also tell you in their form you're watching a film. You know you're watching a film. So I want you always to be watching the film and aware you're watching a film. What I discovered I didn't really know I had ability for was in an old-fashioned way to grip an audience. Even though it's not a commercial film, parts of Swoon are quite gripping. And that was I realized, I have ability. And I think that ability comes from having been an actor and understanding story and performance in a way.
And isn't Grand Fury also really influenced by graphic arts? You were saying
absolutely.
From the commercial world.
Absolutely. And a lot of people, Grand Fury was a visual collective within ACT UP that made graphic material and worked primarily from 1988 to 96. And I think in terms of the other stuff, I went to art school at a period of time where we read Foucault, where we read Derrida, where I read, both, Baudrillard and Judith Butler, et cetera. Well, Judith Butler comes later. And that, I was aware of the notion of, within Foucault of knowledge and power and surveillance. And just in the simplest sense of like seeing and controlling and defining, and that, the discovering when I was making Swoon, phrenology. So there's a sequence in the film where you see many of the characters in profile and there are these diagrams around them. That was a pseudoscience of the 19th and 20th century where racist interpretations of a person's physiognomy would supposedly predict their tendency towards crime. The way in which the relationship of the prison system to the criminalization of queer identities in the 19th and 20th century was acutely interesting because of just my interests as a reader and a maker, but also for personal reasons. Again, like my dad worked in the prison system. I was aware, again, I told you the story the other day, my dad, a young juvenile delinquent who had committed a felony at 16. My father gave counseling to from 16 to 18, and this guy turned his life around. My father didn't see him for decades. The man wrote a letter to the Chicago newspaper saying, this young Catholic social worker helped change my life, and I would love to find in contact. So one day, this is when I'm probably 10, this man comes to our house, and I'm like, oh my God, my dad is famous. What is this? And the notion that you would, just the idea that what a criminal was, and that you could be reformed, and that what the work of that was, and what the defining a criminal intrigued me very young. So yeah, I think it's rooted in things that I built on later studying, but that were in my kind of immediate environment.
That moment when you're pointing to the who's a Jew, what is a criminal, and the nose, and all of those physiognomic that automatically apparently determine what you're going to be or have these proclivities. There was this moment, right? Like a lot of films were, sort of filmmakers were not a lot, some of them were doing that. Can you think of any other? Like I remember only Superstar, Karen Carpenter's story. There's that moment with the anorexia, bulimia, but
Yes. Well, I think there's a kind of...
Edward II?
I mean, I think of that using sort of essay film technique in a traditional narrative movie, and there are a lot of movies that we watch that were influential, like, you know, I mean, so many movies, like, you know, The Gleaners and I by, you know, Agnes Varda, or obviously, you know, Chris Marker's entire body of work, et cetera. And those were movies I watched as a graduate student and, you know, at that time. So the idea of, and also just that, you know, notion of postmodern disruption of either the picture plane or like colliding different surfaces together. At the same time, I was discovering it's, you know, we now live in a world where you could see a Warhol film easily or a Cocteau film easily or a Genet film easily, and you couldn't then. So I knew the Cocteau films incredibly well, but it was very close to the making of Swoon that I saw Un Chant d'Amour the first time. And I was like, oh my God. So, you know, or the same thing like Derek Jarman, to see one of those movies as a special event, you had to wait for movies to come to a theater and be theatrically released. You didn't have streaming and DVDs and all the easy access, so you'd rely on remembering or even misremembering a movie.
No, but I mean, you paid definitely more attention to the film as you're watching it, and it was more memorable in that sense.
For sure.
Which is a memorable experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, you like telling stories. Now, we talked about all this. The release of Swoon was a landmark moment in the history of American independent cinema, and it's a matter of time before the film gets included in the National Registry of Film. We know this by the Library of Congress. It's already been nominated, right, several times?
I believe it has, but it hasn't happened yet, so
Yeah.
I'm hoping and praying.
Sometimes we get sent, you know, like a question or whatever. We put in, I always put in Swoon. And tongues are tied. I think that just went through, yeah. One of the premier works that inspired the coinage of the moniker New Queer Cinema, as Miguel mentioned at the beginning, in the 1990s. And yet with Swoon, you go against the widespread demand for the positive representation of LGBTQ subjects. So, you know, this is like more or less the moment when, what was that film? The Legs Crossed and Uncrossed. Oh my God.
Oh, Basic Instinct.
Basic Instinct, yeah, exactly.
I love that legs crossed and uncrossed makes me know right away it's Basic Instinct.
So, I mean, that was the moment, like killer lesbians again. You're doing killer gay men again.
Yes.
Like, talk a bit about the reaction you may have had from gay community people.
Totally. Well, I moved to New York in '87. I went to an ACT UP meeting that summer. I met a young man named Todd Haynes at that ACT UP meeting. He had gone to Brown. He'd made a movie called Assassins, a film about Rimbaud, which I saw. And then later, I was aware that he made a movie called Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story, but I had not seen it. And I went to a screening, and his colleague, Cynthia Schneider, who he went to Brown with, and he made the film. And I wrote them like an embarrassing fan letter. There's no other way to describe it. Like, Dear Todd Haynes and Cynthia Schneider, when I moved to New York, I dreamed of making movies like the movie you made.
Superstar.
Yes, they were totally kind to me. Todd and I discovered many different affinities and became friends. Through Todd, I met Christine. I think Christine, like 5 minutes after meeting me, she said, you have a forehead the size you could project a movie onto. Not being, you know, a slightly edgy collaborator. And so Todd,
Christine
Vachon, who's the producer of the film and has produced, it was nominated for Past Lives, had her first Oscar nomination for Past Lives as a producer, and has done many, many dozens of movies. So I met Todd during that time. Todd was obsessed with Genet. We spent a ton of time talking about homosexuality and criminality, absolutely, specifically. Mm-hmm. You know, we were like, I don't want to make a coming out movie with a collie in the back seat and 2 gay men or lesbians driving a station wagon. You know, I used to joke all the time when I went out with Swoon that I believed in equal opportunity homicide. And that, you know, as a young gay man, that I used the example of Well, there are a couple of ways. You could look at Mike Leigh's Naked for a more contemporary example, but you could look at a movie like Double Indemnity, which is a fictional film. But, you know, in Double Indemnity, a heterosexual couple becomes so obsessed, the man is so ripe with lust for Barbara Stanwyck, Fred McMurray, that he makes a murder for it. You know, and nobody looks at Double Indemnity and says, those crazy heterosexuals, they have this wild, passionate sexual affair, and it drives them to murder. The heterosexuality has nothing to do with the murder. It's, you know, so it's not, doesn't drive the murder. Whereas when two gay men commit a murder, it defines and drives the murder. So though the notion to want to have a protagonist to have the right to murder might seem strange to you, at that point of history, to me, that seemed really important. Like, I want the right, or when I saw Naked and I saw the movies about couples treating each other very terribly, and I thought, if I made a movie with all gay men or all lesbians treating each other the way the characters did in Naked, people would be like, oh my God, pathological homosexuality. So I wanted the liberty to do what others had done for a long time before, and felt like that was an important turning point storytelling-wise, and feel like, you know, it's the idea that you don't always have to accommodate. Sometimes you can confront. And I was living in a period of time when Ronald Reagan wouldn't say the word AIDS out loud. So it felt like the time to confront. I didn't know Greg Araki before I went to Sundance in 1992, and he showed The Living End. I was aware, I had seen 3 Bewildered People in the Night, but I did not know his work beyond that. Or I didn't know Christopher Munch, who had the movie The Hours and the Times. Yeah. So, you know, I like kind of got dropped into a community of people. Derek Jarman premiered Edward II, or showed, not premiered, Edward II at Sundance, and I had already seen everything he'd made, and that really blew my mind. And I also met Derek Jarman, who embraced me and was kind and, you know, helpful. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, yeah, Living End was something that was coming to mind, because Poison, your Swoon, Living End, these films were definitely not the crowd-pleasing in Castro Street films.
Totally.
And they kind of refused an easy identity politics where somehow gay had to be positive. And you guys are also showing that to be gay or queer means a lot of things. Like, that identity itself is very unstable and full of fractures. So I guess that was the new queer in the new queer cinema moniker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think, like, you see in the movie, the fact of trans people and drag queens, as we would call them, and they call themselves during that time, in my social life, in my nightclubbing life. And they also occupied my consciousness in ways I didn't quite understand yet. You know, Butler's first writings were appearing, and other work around gender was appearing, and I was beginning to understand that there was a kind of complexity around the way that sexual identity and gender intersected. Leopold and Loeb had no drag queen friends that I'm aware of, so all of that stuff I'm showing in the movie is completely a fictionalized element.
Right, right. So you are sort of projecting, in a way, from the 20s. Although who knows what happened in the 20s?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
Weimar we know, but not USA. So how would you situate the film, this film, in relation to the more recent work you have done, say, with Pride? It's a 6-part series, I don't know how many of you have seen it, that offers a certain version of the history of LGBTQ movement in the US or North America? Just US?
US.
Yeah. So it's a 6-part series, mini-series, on what channel, I forget.
It was done for FX, and you can see it on Hulu. It lives on Hulu now.
And you did the first.
Yes.
Speak a bit about that and situate that in relation to Swoon.
That was fun. I mean, I think I'm 63. The generation I'm in, to give an example, I produced a movie called I Shot Andy Warhol. I Shot Andy Warhol was co-written by a person named, it was written and directed by Mary Herron and co-written by a person named Daniel Minahan. Daniel Minahan made one feature. He recently made a new feature. That feature is called Series 7. And then he went on to direct all of Game of Thrones that you love. Not every episode, but millions, and did tons of very blue chippy television. Many, and Mary did as well. Many of my contemporaries pivoted to television directing. I don't know what to tell you. They were like, do you want to direct 6 Feet Under? And I was like, I don't know, TV. I was a dope. I probably should have pursued and did not. But I maybe was not in a place where that was the right thing, because I'm quite independent and strong-minded. So it was fun to do an episode for television much later that was done right before COVID happened, because I was amenable to the idea in television, I didn't have final cut, and there's many, many opinions that come in, and also that you have to work with them to define what you want. I got to pitch first, so I chose to do the 1950s because I understood that it was so long ago that I might be able to convince them to let me do part of the episode scripted, like with actors playing real roles, and they said, yes, you can do that. And so then I decided I wanted to do political cases. So the Killer had done preliminary work about Killer Films, the production company, had done preliminary work about the stories they were interested in. They didn't know the story about Lester Hunt, which was one of the main stories I told, which briefly is and most of you won't know the story either, which is shocking as Americans that we do not know it. But in 1954, a Democratic senator from Wyoming, Lester Hunt, killed himself in the Senate offices, and he was being blackmailed by the McCarthyite Republicans in that period of time because the Senate was closely tied. They were trying to bully him out of running for re-election in Wyoming because his son, who had recently exited seminary school, was arrested for soliciting an undercover cop. Shockingly, Lafayette Park, right across from the White House in the 50s, was the cruising grounds, like unbelievably. And so that young man, basically, will out him to the whole state of Wyoming, and the crime will be known to all. So yeah, that story was the starting point. The young man, the son, actually ended up marrying a woman and having children with her. And when I started doing that episode, he was in his mid-80s. So that was the starting point, is tracking down Lester Hunt Jr., but Buddy Hunt was his name. Yeah, and it was a way to that's truly an essay film, a hybrid film where I'm moving between scripted narrative, documentary interview, and archive. I was amazed I think the film is actually somewhat experimental in form, and I found it's also conventional television, but I take chances with the form in a way that it was fun to do, and I was surprised that the FX allowed that.
And you said also some of the things they said were surprisingly the channel had no problem with it.
Yeah, another one of the stories I deal with is a woman named Madeline Tress, who worked for the Department of Commerce. She was fired for being lesbian. They spied on her. They listened to every one of her phone calls and called her in and we've listened to you talk to your girlfriend this day and that day, etc. Her brother is a photographer named Arthur Tress. So they were both queer siblings, and both of them in different contexts talk about having sex at age 13. I don't know. I thought children talking about having sex and it being a happy experience on network television was not something. Arthur was told the story of at 13 he would go to Times Square and he would sometimes pick up older adult men and sleep with them. And I thought that would be the first thing they would say, you must cut this. We cannot have children having sex with agency or happiness. And no one ever said a word about it. So they then did have other odd and specific notes, but yeah.
What's next?
I hope I could someday make a film or limited series about the English fashion designer Ossie Clark. I wrote a pilot about that, and I don't know that that's going to exist as television or feature, if it's going to happen in the world. I'm making another essay film that's the first thing I'm doing that has any element of autobiography in it, or material about kind of my own life. And then I'm pursuing 2 novels simultaneously. I can't tell you what the novels are publicly because I don't have rights to them, but I'm on the verge of either one or maybe both of these novels to adapt. And it would be the first time that I'd be making a movie from entirely fictional material, which would be a blast.
Okay, I'll have the last word. What gets very conveniently dropped out often from when people introduce Tom, I did that yesterday, I can't remember if Miguel did it too. He's actually a professor at Columbia University.
Lucky me.
In what department?
I'm in the School of the Arts film program.
And one of his students is my colleague, our very own Professor Althea Wasso. I wanted to point out, she works on 2 things, the prison system, the carceral system, and essay film. And she was a student of his at one point. So we have a direct connection.
We do. What a delightful one. You're welcome. What a delight it's been. I just want to say for a minute to say thank you, Bhaskar, and to thank Bishnu, and to thank the team here for their hospitality, Emily and all the rest, for the incredible hospitality, and for you, the audience, and your engagement in our conversations while I've been visiting. It's been a treat. So thank you.
I'm going to ask you Q&A questions now.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So, okay, students, ask intelligent and impressive questions so that I can gloat.
Hello. First of all, huge thank you for coming. And my question is about the episode of Pride that you did. Could you talk more about the experimental elements of that episode, particularly the scenes with the senator as he's sort of ominously walking from the elevator to kill himself?
Yes.
Because I think that was where it reached sort of the climax of some of the experimental elements. But yeah.
Yep. Thank you for your question. One of the biggest frustrations I had of working, my big complaint about working for a network, really to this day I'm mad, is that I wanted to start the episode with scripted material. So I was going to start with a man is shaving his face and he goes to work and you're just in a drama. He's not speaking, he's carrying a gun and he goes to his office and he shoots himself and you're 3 or 4 minutes in and then it cuts out and you realize you're in a documentary or an essay film. I then also tried to start the movie with Madeline Tress. So a woman is walking down the hall and talking to, and she gets an interview and all the rest of it. No matter what I did, no matter how I tried, they would never let me cold open with the scripted material. So I'm not happy, actually, with the Pride episode that there's 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I think it is of explaining the concept and setting you up for what's going to come. So that, to me, that's completely not, that's, conventional. That's explain first, show later. I wanted to show first and tell after, that sort of thing. And, I think there's experimental things about, I'm obsessed with the mugshot, as you might expect from my work. And so even in Pride, the mugshot is everywhere. There's 2 main camera positions. One is, I had 2 cameras simultaneously photographing every interview. One was placed directly in front of their eye line, so you saw their face flat. I thought of that as Fra Angelico or Piero della Francesca. I thought of it from art historical terms, a flat presentational angle. And the other one was directly profile. Every character is shot the same way, so that any interview, I could cut from frontal face to frontal face, or I could cut from frontal face to profile, character A in frontal face and character B in profile. And I did the same thing in the scripted material. So I could move between scripted material and documentary material and archival material on this visual idea of a pivot, basically, and that it was not going to be about cause and effect storytelling, and it would allow me to move anywhere I wanted in the episode at any time. Then I guess, there's a Hal, oh God, come on, brain, last name, the San Francisco photographer who shot all the Super 8 film that I use in the film throughout, whose last name is escaping me. His first name is Hal. He was a Super 8 hobbyist, and he shot thousands of footage of Super 8 film. For those of you, for instance, interested in the Japanese internment, even though he was not Japanese, there is incredible footage in his archive, which is, I think, the GLBT museum that's in San Francisco, of this, of what's happening when the Japanese population is being rounded up in San Francisco and deported. And that archival footage was captured. I mainly used what showed this marriage he had with a younger man, a long relationship. Interestingly, since gay marriage was illegal in that period, Hal had to adopt a guy named Torg, that was his nickname, as his son in order for the relationship to be recognized. This was common between same-sex couples in this period, adoption, rather, because marriage was not a possibility. And that material allowed me to, that really opened up the film, that archive material. I also thought, Pride's different. Pride's funny. I'm funny in it sometimes. I'm also very tender-hearted and sappy and romantic, things I usually do not show, Swoon and Savage Grace don't have those elements. So yeah, and I think in some ways just experimentality of tone and emotion and feeling in a way that just is a different thing. And it really opened up. It was like a discovery to work in that way. And then just from a production standpoint, it's insane how few days we shot it. It's 4 shooting days of documentary and 2 scripted days. 6 shooting days, that entire episode and archival material. TV, of course, is absolutely brutal. TV is a horror show because they work so quickly compared to films. But yeah, so that's what I think of it. And then it was just intriguing to have it have that audience in a way and be out in the world. It's also depressing about TV. Like, all my films I have prints of, and all I have of Pride is a moderately high resolution output because the network treats it as a commodity. So I have absolutely no ownership in the thing that I did.
Hi, yeah, going back to Swoon, I was really interested in the visual style of the film, especially how there was a sort of balance between some scenes which looked very naturalistic and realistic and immersive, and then others that felt they had a kind of dreamlike quality. And I was just curious, what were some of your visual influences when it came to crafting the film?
Totally. An influence I don't really talk a ton about, but is very big, is the movie by Robert Bresson called Pickpocket. Both in terms of several ways. One, I don't know if you know the movie, but it's an incredible movie from 1959, directed by a French director named Robert Bresson, that follows the action of a pickpocket, and you follow him very closely. It uses voiceover in an intriguing way. You could go and watch the Paul Schrader movie American Gigolo, which shockingly is a remake of Pickpocket. I'm not kidding. Ask Paul Schrader. He will confirm this for you. So that movie had a big influence based, like the visual poetry of the use of black and white, the movement of it, the fluidity of cut to cut, the kind of dynamic staging of it, the fact that it puts the burden of interpretation on the audience. It's up to you to decide what's wrong with Nathan and Richard. What do you think? I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm going to put that interpretive moral burden into your lap. There's a movie by Joseph Lewis called Gun Crazy from 1950. It's a low-budget film noir movie shot very quickly. It stars John Dahl and Peggy Cummins. John Dahl was a gay man working in Hollywood at the time. John Dahl also appears as one of the half of the couple in Rope. I was obsessed a little bit with these 50s actors that were gay men. Farley Granger is another one of these actors who's gay, playing mainly straight roles, but was closeted. And in Gun Crazy, I'm ripping it off left and right. So like, embarrass me, let's show it. So all the driving scene around the dead body in the car, I'm copying Gun Crazy. Don't get me in trouble with the Hitchcock estate. I guess I probably shouldn't say it aloud, but I will. Maybe they'll come after me now. The first lines of dialogue that Nathan and Richard say to each other, not the first lines in the movie overall, but the bed scene when they kiss each other, how's your leg? Hurts a little. And your stomach, empty as a football, is what Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly say to each other in Rear Window. So I'm quoting intentionally dialogue from other movies and burying it inside the film. The film was supposed to have rope and compulsion shown on a television set. That's why there's actually a remote in the bed. And I shot that footage, but I couldn't afford to license it. And then, like I talked about a short film about killing, nothing formally, but the brutality and I was like, he was not screwing around. And he was going to, like the movie was going to grab you completely and not be scared of it. Bonnie and Clyde and other amorphu, mad couple movies, but especially a period movie that was helping us understand both the earlier period and the period that the time was made within. So yeah, those are a few things.
Can I slip in a quick question?
Yeah.
Can you think of one instance where the limited budget forced you to do something that had amazing effect?
Oh God, all the time. I mean, all over the place. There is a scene where I'm doing an interrogation, and all the detectives are interrogating the two boys. Mm-hmm. And that's done with all the actors are standing in the room, and they all sit in the same chair, and it's in front of a white wall. And the cinematographer is just panning through the white wall, and panning through the white wall, and whip panning into the white wall, and zip hop zooming into the white wall. And the other actors are standing there, and everybody's looking directly into the lens, so that each cut could work cut to cut, because they're all seeing each other. Do you really need to see a table? Are you dying to see a notebook? You're not really. So this and that, understanding what you left off screen could activate the viewer's imagination better than what I could put on screen because I had no money. And just the inherent minimalism of that approach, which Bresson or Carl Dreyer or other directors had already taught me. And the same with film noir. American film noir, especially low-budget film noir, they did long take and didn't reverse in scenes and made you involved by what you imagined, not what you saw. So, yeah.
I just had a question about, in Swoon, there's a moment where one of the actors goes and shakes I forget the man's name, and says, "You just shook the hand of a murderer."
Yes.
But there was no recall there. What was that moment specifically for? Because I thought maybe there would be a recall.
What happens is that's the chauffeur, that's Nathan's family chauffeur who's cleaning up their car after they return for the night. And if the boys, if the boys had been more careful about that, the chauffeur would have never witnessed it. Because when the chauffeur then goes to drop off pajamas at the night to make sure these wealthy boys sleep comfortably, he let slip that, he could have never gone out because I was fixing the car. And that alerted to the police the truth that Nathan, Leopold, and Richard Loeb had rented another car to commit the crime. So, you could say, I didn't use a family car, it was home, but no, in fact, they used another car. And it became a element in the detection of the crime. It's one of the ways.
So then they looked for where they could have possibly.
Exactly. That was one of the elements of the stutter. The other was just that this pair of glasses that was found at the place that Nathan frequently went birding had a hinge on the side that literally only 3 pairs had been sold in the city of Chicago. I don't get into that granular level in the movie, but that's what it was. There were literally 3 pairs. And so they went to knock on the first place, the person's wearing them. They went to knock on the second place, the person's wearing them. They went to knock on Nathan's place, and he's like, oh, I've lost them, and I don't know where they are. And that's what began the investigation.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up question?
Yeah.
Does the actual person who committed the murder, does he say that to the chauffeur? Or was that?
I don't know that for sure. Things that I'm dramatizing that would not have the only things that I'm putting words back into the mouth that they actually spoke is when it's in a context that the state is surveying them, which is essentially all the interrogations with psychologists, those crazy things they tell about master and slave fantasies and all that, that's all real. They were called alienists at that period. What a great word. And not psychiatrists or psychologists. So those things come from the record, and my job was to sort of take what worked in that and put it in the actor's mouth, and then other things I had to write. So I don't know at all if Nathan and Richard ever had an argument, you wanted to get pregnant, if you could get pregnant, you would, wouldn't you? That's something I made up. That's dialogue I made up. And so the movie's moving between scripted dramatic scenes that are trying to show you psychological dynamics or events that weren't on the public record, woven together with real things that were on the public record.
Because once he kills the boy, he seems to have the upper hand for a bit, right? He looks very, you couldn't do it, I did it.
Yes.
So he's being more cavalier or bravura type thing.
Totally. No, and I think it's about the circulation of power between, this is where, Foucault is relevant, because it's about the circulation of power and what does it mean when the spotlight hits you? Do you want to be seen? Do you not want to be seen? What's really going on between the two of them?
Also, the Foucault is also important, the repressive hypothesis that he has about the Victorian period, precisely the period that's prudish, when people can't do this, can't do that, but they cannot shut up talking about sex, right?
Exactly.
So that's a productivity of repression. And we see that here with the way that the radio jockey starts fantasizing about the black man and his sexuality.
Exactly.
I mean, totally unnecessarily and totally not even there.
Yeah.
But they have to go there, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so we are closing down. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Bhaskar.
Thank you so much.
What a delight, Bhaskar. Really so fun. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
I've been wanting to bring him here for I don't know how many years, but I'm glad that it worked out.
And what a delight it has been.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.